I do want to talk to you about, because I think what you're talking about was also like kind of liberalism and sort of the halfway measures, and in your book, integrated, which I think is really critical, because obviously, like, studying integration, it's like it should be studied from the vantage point of those who were shut out of, who were deliberately kept separate, which are Black Americans, Black students. But you talk about actually that that integration has failed Black students, and how there were educational systems before integration that were quite
robust. Yeah.
Robust. But even building communal building blocks that you so perfectly lay out. So just talk about like the implementation of Brown versus Board, which is so important, but like what did they get wrong?
And let me just finish that DEI point, because I did not answer your question in one sentence. Let me just say the issue that I take with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, all terms that there's nothing wrong with them. We should strive for it. We should grab onto them and hold them close. But often those terms end up being about how you feel in a certain place, and they're able to roll back actual rights in order to give you DEI. And now DEI, they want to get rid of that too. So we are rolling back to a whole other period. With Brown v. Board, here's one of the things I will make sure that I get a chance to say, that because I didn't know it before I started researching the book. Brown v. Board of Education is this sort of landmark civil rights moment, like many of the other moments that I mentioned. And it's the Supreme Court case that gives us Thurgood Marshall arguing that separate but equal, this idea that it's not the separation that's a problem. It's not making it illegal for Black and white people to occupy the same space that's a problem. It's having it not be equul. Mm-hmm. So let us be separate, just make them be equal. Something I will say we have never actually tried, but that is not the point. We've never funded it. People went out their way to not have separate but equal. So what I didn't know, I always just taken it as an article of faith. This is obviously, one of the most important moments for Black equality, and then American equality for what it ends up, equality in the US for what it ends up making possible for others. But then I discovered that in Topeka, Kansas, in the place, the school board that is the named defendant in Brown v. Board of Education, the Black people in Kansas and Topeka and Wichita, the two big towns in Kansas, were overwhelmingly opposed to Brown v. Board. They did not want to have their schools closed so that they could go to schools with white people, because the way that Kansas dealt with the post-Reconstruction era, coming out of the Civil War, there's a Reconstruction moment, and then the reinstitution of white supremacy. The way that Kansas did it was to say, we're going to have separate but equal, but mean it. So all of the Black schools in Wichita and Topeka were funded at the exact same levels as the white schools. The buildings were heated and cooled at the exact same ways. The books, same books. The teachers all had to have master's degrees or PhDs and were paid the same. Kansas took the equal part seriously.
Wow.
They stand alone. This was not widespread. And so the Black people were like, well, go to Alabama or Mississippi, where they are, in fact, making sure that they're giving Black school-age kids the least amount possible, not even letting them go to school for an entire year or a school year. They can go 3-4 months, depending on if they need to pick crops. Or, where there's not heating and cooling, where, go there, fix that, because we have equal schools that we love. But the NAACP said that this idea of segregation was so important that it didn't matter if what it was going to do was dismantle Black educational into schools, Black schools, and fire Black teachers. So in the aftermath, you kind of fast forward to today from that ruling, which led to the firing of so many, about 80% of Black teachers and administrators were fired following this ruling, and Black schools were closed. And the former dean of Howard School of Education says that in the decade following Brown v. Board, almost $2.2 billion of income were wiped out. And 80% of Black schools were closed, and Black teachers were fired. And in the aftermath, what you're doing is then saying, now we want to send bus all of the Black kids an hour away to white schools that very often did not want them, weren't prepared for them, weren't interested in them. Like, there was all these trauma stories that Black kids started to have about their treatment at the hands of white adults and children regularly. You can still hear about these integration stories today. It's more where you'll have something like, there'll be one school and everybody will go to the school, but there's a track that's mostly Black and brown, and then there's a track that's mostly white and Asian. And then the AP track on the top, and the Black and brown one is at the bottom.
And like, I mean, that happened in my high school. You know, like the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about my high school in California because of just how segregated it was. It was so tracked. It was the most tracked. You know, but we had this sort of like, diversity is our strength, and, you know, really leaned into the multicultural, you know, aspect of the school. But at the end of the day, we all knew that the AP classes were majority white, and we all knew, I mean, I even had teachers who were like, you're in ghetto science, and that's what they would call it. Yeah. So it's just like tracking super exists, you know.
Super exists, and it reproduces. So you have a building, and the building, based on demographics, you would call it integrated. I mean, you'd have different kinds of folks, but you look at who's getting the best education in these spaces, and you can still do a racial kind of analysis and breakdown. And there's a long history to where that comes from. But with integrated, what I point out is so much was damaged in the ways that integration was implemented, tried to be implemented. So much was taken away, so many teachers lost, that that when things started to go badly, when things started to fail, when it became clear that integration was not going to just be an easy thing, easily implemented, there were no schools for Black students to go back to. There were no teachers still there to teach them. So you went from a system which too few people really know. I talked to, my students certainly, and they're shocked to know that there were high quality, high performing all Black schools pre-Brown v. Board, that there were quality teachers with masters and doctorates who did amazing things. With so-called hard to teach Black kids. They don't even know that ever existed. It's been so removed even from our consciousness, much less reality.
Can I did want to just pick up on a couple threads there, because one thing I saw you've talked about is that instead of starting with the kids, which was very traumatizing to integrate the kids, starting with teachers and administrators, having them integrate first, or as part coming along with the kids would have done. I mean, jobs could have been maintained. It also could have shown an example. If you see adults integrating with one another, that's important, and tells you how you can behave and treat, one another. So it's just like, that seems like such a oversight.
There's so many Black teachers, so letters and oral histories. My grandparents were Black teachers in the segregated South. So that's a part of, they were in Clearwater, Florida. That's part of why I know some of this history, because I know the people who raised me. And I'm like, and I didn't see them in the stories we were telling about schooling and teachers. I just couldn't find them. But a lot of the teachers, including my grandparents, really fought hard. They fought the NAACP hard. They fought against them winning the case. And then when they won, they wanted Black teachers and administrators to go first and integrate these schools and work out whatever tensions they had, and then invite the kids. They're like, let the adults figure it out. And then you also have faces that they'll be used to in those institutions.
Of course,
but no, they didn't want to do that because the NAACP felt like sending children, and it's an age of television is just starting to really catch on in the 1950s. People are sitting around in the evening watching programming. It's this new phenomenon, and they felt like they could win the hearts of the country by showing children they knew they were going to be sending them into these in the South, that they were going to be sending them into schools where there would be crowds and spit and, violence and threats. But they thought the innocence, and this is a fatal, to my mind, fatal flaw here, that the innocence of children, the fact that they're babies, that Ruby Bridges is 6 years old, that somehow this was going to win the hearts and the minds of the country, and they would bring pressure to bear against the terror that white families were subjecting children to. That, of course, fatal error just did not happen.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.